Today's daf is daf ches, and let's just remind ourselves of the stira in two brisos, so that we can pick up on daf ches. The brisa on daf zayin amid beis addresses a case where a person is chayav to three different three different people who want to collect money from him. He's chayav to, number one, a nizak, because his animal was mazik. Number two, he's chayav to a balchov because he borrowed money. And number three, he's chayav to ksubas isha. He has in his possession beinanis and ziburis. And the brisa, the first brisa, establishes that the nizak and the balchov both will collect beinanis, which in a sense makes sense that the nizak normally could collect idis, but there are no idis, so he goes down one level and he collects beinanis. And the balchov has rights to beinanis, so he collects beinanis. On the other hand, we have a brisa which is quoted here on Daf Ches that we saw yesterday, and according to that brisa, in the case where the person who owes money has beinanis and ziburis, then the balchov collects ziburis, whereas normally the balchov has rights to beinanis. So how do we reconcile this stira? And that's where we're up to the second attempt of the Gemara to reconcile this apparent contradiction between the two brisos as to whether or not the balchov collects from beinanis or ziburis. So we're up to the bois ema. Let's just see how many lines we want to count down from the top of the page. Bois ema, idi ve'idi, I would say it's about 15 lines down from the top. First word of the line is ema. Idi ve'idi. And let's just add a point here from Rashi that the Gemara now is holding against Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba was the one who holds Bishalohem Shamin. And this Gemara that we're learning is on the opposite side of the court, holding that Bishal Olam Hem Shamin. There's an objective definition of the various qualities of karka. Idi ve'idi, shlo haisalo idis umachara. The Gemara now in the Bois ema is putting aside the previous reconciliation of the two brises, where according to one brisa, he owned idis at the time of the halva, and therefore the beinanis gained a shibud towards the malveh, as opposed to the other brisa, where he never owned idis in his life. And therefore, if you hold b'shal olam heim govim, then the recourse of the malveh is to ziburis. Now the Gemara is saying, no, both prices are talking about a scenario in which the lover only owns beinanis and ziburis, and we're holding Mishal Olam Hein Shamin. So he never owned the idis at all. V'lo kasha. Ha dishavya beinanis shalo ke'idis the alma. V'kan delo shavya beinanis shalo ke'idis the alma. And it works like this. We said that according to the second brisa, the Baal Chov collects from Ziburis. And why is that? Because of the two qualities of karka that are owned by the lover, what he has is Beininus and Ziburis, but his Beininus is Idis. From an objective market perspective, that Beininus that's owned by the lover reaches the high quality of Idis. And therefore, the Malva has no recourse to collect from Beininus, because that Beininus is Idis, and the Malva never had rights to collect Idis. He only has rights to collect Beininus. Now, in this particular scenario, the Gemara is explaining the second brisa as a case where the lova has karka, which is even better quality, which is his idis, but since we're holding mishal olam hein shamin, the Baal Chov can collect Beininus. Just 1 second. The Baal Chov, cannot collect Beininus because that Beininus is Idis, because Mishal Olam. So he can only collect Ziburis. But the first brisa that says that the Baal Chov collects from Beininus is talking about a scenario in which he never had Idis, he only has Beininus and Ziburis, but his Beininus is not worth the Idis da Alma, but it's the same identical Beininus of Rova Olam. So the Baal Chov could collect from Beininus. So once again, just to summarize the Gemara's answer, does the Baal Chov collect from Beininus or Ziburis? It all depends. If his Beininus is equal to the Idis, the Alma, therefore the Malv has no rights to collect from Beininus, because that's really Idis. And again, as I said over and over again, we're holding now B'Shel Olam Ein Sham. So Memela, the Baal Chov only could collect from Ziburis of the Lover. But the Brisa, the original Brisa, that gives rights to the Malva to collect from Beininus, that's because the Beininus of the Lova is equal to the Beininus of Shel Olam. The Gemara offers another possible reconciliation of the two brisos. Idi ve'idi, both brisos, kigon shahoisa beinis shelo kebeinis di alma. And if that be the case, then we understand very well why the first brisa maintains that the Malva will collect from Beininus, because that Beininus is Beininus on an objective level of Lialma. So what is the issue that divides the two brisos? This is the suffix of Rav Shmuel. Marsavar, the Tana of the second brisa, who has the Malva collect from Ziburis Bishalo Hein Shamin. And therefore, since the Loves Beininus is considered Idis from the perspective of the Lova, because the Beininus of the Lova is the best karka that he has, so the Baal Chov would have to collect from Ziburis, like the second brisa. Umar Sover, but the first brisa that gives rights to the Malva to collect from Beininus, that's the brisa reflects the sheet of Shel Olam Ein Shamin. And again, even though from the Lova's subjective perspective, the Beininus that he has is really Idis from his perspective, because the best karka he has, but from the perspective of Shal Olam, that Beinanis is Beinanis. And therefore the Baal Chov could collect from Beinanis. Now we have another approach to reconcile the brisos. Ravina Omar, you can explain these brisos whether or not you hold Bishalohen Shomin or Bishal Olamhen Shomin, but Bida'ula Pligi. The controversy between the two brisos is about the statement of Ula. And just by introduction, Ula is going to throw a whole nother perspective on the Sugya Baal Chov. We assume the Baal Chov collects from Beinanis, and that's his right. Ula says no. Really, the Baal Chov, otherwise known as the Malveh, should be collecting from Ziburis, and that's what Ula is going to prove from the pasuk of Avot, Ayin Beis Vav Tet. But the Rabbanon made a takon of Shalotil Nel Delis B'nei Lovin to make it more attractive for people to extend loans, and they upgraded the Malva's rights to collect from Ziburis up to Beinanis. That was the takana that was made by the Chacham. So let's read it inside. Bida Ula Pligi, the Amar Ula Dvar Torah Baal Chov B'Ziburis. Shenemar, with regard to Avot, the Torah says in Dvarim Perek Chav Daled, Bachutz Ta'amod, V'ha'ish asher ata noshe bo, meaning the lover, Yotzi elechas Avot hachutza. So the Malva stands on the outside of the house of the lover. The lover brings out a collateral, an Avot, and a mashkon in Hebrew, and of course, the lover is going to choose a low-quality object. He doesn't want to give up a high-quality object. And therefore, in a parallel way, when the Malva collects from Karka, he's going to collect from the lowest quality level of Karka, which is Ziburis. Beinanis. Why did the Chacham establish against the Torah law that the Baal Chov could collect from a higher quality of Beinanis? Kadesh lo tinol dels v'neon, as we said before, to encourage people to extend loans. Mar islei takanta deula, umar leslei takanta deula. So the first Tana in the first Brisa accepted the takana of Ula, and that's why Baal Chov collects from Beinanis. But the second Tana, who says that the Baal Chov only collects from Ziburis, he never accepted and recognized the takon of Ula. So on a Din Doraisa level, the Baal Chov only has rights to collect Ziburis, and that we derive from Avot. And that's exactly what the Brisa says, that the Baal Chov could only collect from Ziburis. Now we're going to study a brisa that addresses the question of lekuchos, which means that the mocher, who's also the lover, or shall we say, he's also the one who's chayav all these different kinds of chiyuvim, sold various types of karka. Tana Rabbanan. So you have a person who's a mazik, owes money to the nizak. He's a Baal Chov, meaning a lover, owes money to the malva, and he's a husband who owes the ksuba to his wife. And he has different quality levels of karka. He's got idis, beinanis, and ziburus. Machar le'echad, if he sold all his fields, idis, beinanis, and ziburus to one person, or lishlosha b'nei adam ke'echad, or with one mechira, he sold all three karkos to three different people, three different lekuchos. And the halacha is that if you're a nosha, meaning you have money to collect from so-and-so, and he sold his karka, you have recourse to collect for the lokeach, is kulon nichnesu tachas habaylim. Each and every one of these noshim, meaning the malve, the isha, and the nizak, will collect according to his rights. Meaning the nizak collects from idis, the balchov from beinanis, and the isha from ziburis. However, the brisa continues and says, "Bazachar zeh," if it wasn't a mechira ke'echad b'vasachas, but rather he sold to three different people, three different levels of karkos, one after the other, then govim min ha'achron. We have a principle in gvias lekuchos of makom hinachti lecha. In other words, you can only collect from the last lokeach because the previous lokeachim have a right to say, look, I left bnei chorin in the hands of the balchov. I'm using the word balchov in a general sense. So fine, now all three noshim will jump on the achron, on the lokeach achron. Because lokeach harishon, the lekuchos harishonim are off the hook because they left the karka in the hands of the balchov. So therefore, govim min ha'achron. Govim min ha'achron means all the noshim will collect from the last buyer. Ein lo. Let's say the last buyer only bought a small tract of land. He doesn't have enough money to pay up a piron for all the noshim. So then the nosha that comes first will collect from the achron. And then when the second nosha comes, we send them back to the sheni. If let's say there were three, is go milufonov. Ein lo, go milufnei fonov. Then he goes back to the first location. So the Gemara now clarifies these dinim in the brisa. In the Reish of the brisa, it says machran li echad, and then they all collect from that echad hechi dami. Ilema, if we're going to say that he sold all three karkos bevas achas, meaning with one star he sold all his three karkos, is the Gemara is going to ask a kind of a pshita question. Hashta, now you told me in the second variation or scenario of the ratio that if he sold lishlosha, he sold to three different people with one simultaneous haknoah. I mean, you could say that if you check the hours, the exact time on each of the shtaros, then one shtar came before the other shtar. And yet, Amrit, you say that kulam nichnasu tachas habaylim. Right? In other words, since you can't really tell exactly precisely the moment of each of the three kinyanim, of the three mechiros, so we don't know really who came before whom, is therefore kulam nichnasu tachas habaylim. They all have the rights to collect. Each one kindino. Is therefore mechar li'adam echad miboy? Was there any need for the brisa to tell me? It seems so superfluous, so understood, what we say upgrade, that in the case where he sold all his karkos to one person, do you have to tell me that each one of the noshim will be gova mimenu kedino? This one idis, this one beinis, this one zigrus al pshita. And therefore, we have to assume that the Reisha is talking about a case where when he sold all his karkos li'osav adam, it was bazecher zeh. And the price is telling me that each one is gova kedino, and we don't say that they all get to collect from the last piece of karka. So now the Gemara is ready for its kasha. Umayshna, why do you change the din in shlosha? That if three bought bazecher zeh, and you're telling me that they all collect from the achron, to kol chav v'chad omerli. each one of the lekuchos has a right to say. We're going back to lekuchos rishonos. Makom hinachti l'cha makom. I left you karka in the hands of the mischayev of bnei chorim that you could collect from. So therefore, I'm off the hook. I don't have any responsibility. Ligvos mena, go collect from the bnei chorim. Is hainami. Then, even in this case, where he himself, that means one lokeach, bought all these three fields, on each one of the karkos, he should be able to say, well, I left you karka, therefore your rights to collect are all from the last karka, the last sale. And why does the Brisa say that each one is gova kedino? Mar answers hachamayas kinon kigon shalokach idis bachrono. The last karka to be sold was idis. Now, if we can apply the principle of hinachti l'cha makom ligvos mimenu, then they're all going to jump on the idis. And of course, he, the Mischayev, would prefer not to have to pay up in idis. He would prefer that each one collect kedino. Otherwise, not only the nizak will collect from idis, but even the malva will collect from idis, and even the isha will collect from idis. So therefore, what the Mischayev wants to gain here, his goal is that only the nizak would collect from idis and not the balchov or the isha. So the Gemara says that, okay, the Mischayev has vested interest to pawn off the idis onto the nizak so that the balchov and the isha will not jump on the idis. But what right does he have to do so? Since he sold idis bachrona, l'chora, their rights to collect through shibudim are all focused and concentrated on the achrona, on the idis. And who cares whether the lokeach says, well, I don't want you all to collect from idis. Why does he have a right to do so? The Gemara answers, Mishum da'amar lei, the purchaser, right, the lokeach has a right to say to all these noshim, Isha siku v'shakilu kedinaychu shkilu. If you don't say anything, and you're not toveh idis, but each one will be toveh. This one, idis, this one, benis, this one, ziburis, fine, muta. But the ilo, if that's not what you want to all jump on the idis, then mahadrina stars the ziburis lemare. I'm gonna translate down the Gemara literally. I'm gonna return the shtar kinyan of ziburis back to the mocher, and then the mocher, who's the nosher, right? Who's not the nosher, who's the mischayev, has bnei chori of ziburis and shkilisu kulam ziburis. You'll all have to jump on ziburis because ein gobim shubadim b'makom sheish bnei chorim. So in a sense, the mocher, who's the mischayev, has a shield, so to speak, not a shield, a sword over the heads of the noshim, because he can threaten them and say, look, I'm going to return the shtar on the ziburis and nullify that kinyan, such that now I have ziburis and you'll all have to collect from ziburis. And why is that so? Because you collect from bnei chorin and not from mishubad. Now, there's a long discussion here in the Rishonim, etc., about this business of, as we translate the Gemara literally, that he returns the shtar. Returning the shtar is not a kinyan. So many Rishonim will say it doesn't mean literally that he returns the shtar, it means that he does a new sale. But Tosa seems to assume that the fact that he could return the shtar is enough of a threat to make his point of hinachti. If you're going to tell me that the buyer has the right to say, I'll nullify this kinyan and return ziburis to the hands of the mischayev, then why did the Brisa say that kol echad v'echad gova kedino, which means that the nizak has a right to collect from idis